Good afternoon. This is Lucian Pera, and we're here today in Memphis, Tennessee to interview Dr. Benjamin Hooks. It's October 28, 1998 today, and this interview is taking place as a part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Good afternoon, Dr. Hooks. Good afternoon again, Dr. Hooks.
Good afternoon.
For the record, sort of, as I understand it, your full name is Benjamin Lawson Hooks.
That's right.
And you were born on January 31, 1925.
That's correct.
Right here in Memphis.
Right.
I think between the two of us, we may be some of the few still left native Memphians. But I want to ask you about, first of all, the way I addressed you to begin with, because during your long career, people have appropriately called you by a number of different titles. For example, Judge Hooks, Reverend Hooks, Dr. Hooks. And I guess the first question I would have is, from your perspective, is there one of those or another that sort of feels to fit better for you?
Well, I've had several titles, and I guess I like them all. I was Judge Hooks, I was Commissioner Hooks, I was Executive Director Hooks, Reverend Hooks, and Doctor is sort of an honorary situation, I think, because while I've got 35 or 40 honorary degrees, my only earned doctorate is the customary Juris Doctorate you get when you finish law school.
Let me start by asking you about, maybe before the beginning, about your parents and your grandparents. Let me ask you first about your parents. Tell me a little about your mom and your dad.
My father was born here in Memphis, 1890. I lived to the age of 83. And in 1907, he and his brother opened a photography studio known as Hooks Brothers Studio. And from that day until almost his death, he was engaged in the photography business. That name was well known throughout the city. In fact, since for maybe 40 or 50 years, they had the only photography studio owned by black people. There are many others who made pictures, but they had a place of business at 164 Beale and remained there for years and years. And they worked in all the schools, churches. They made pictures, all commercial and portrait. And there were very few people in Memphis who did not know my father. My mother was born in Huntsville, Alabama, and her mother died when she was very young, and she was raised by her grandmother and her father. My mother and father were married approximately 60 years before their deaths. They died in the same year, 3 weeks apart, in fact. And they had 7 children. I was the 5th child. And I had, at one time, 3 brothers and 3 sisters. 1 sister and 2 brothers are dead now. My father's parents were pioneer Memphians. My grandmother was actually born in Kentucky. There's a book written about her called Angel of Beale Street.
Now, her name was?
Julia Ann Britton Hooks. She was born in 1852, but was never a slave. She reputed they felt her ancestry went back to Chief Justice John Marshall of the United States Supreme Court. And her family was, brothers were very famous as jockeys in the Kentucky Derby back before they prohibited black people from being jockeys. Of course, you know, we've had a coming and going period. My grandmother was an early student of Berea College in Kentucky before it became resegregated. And
that was very unusual in those days, wasn't it? Both for a woman and for a black person.
Yes, it was. In fact, she was. It's a little strange story. They knew the history, but they hid it for many years. And they finally brought it out. One of the new presidents decided it was a great story to tell.
You mean Berea College?
Berea College brought out this history that she was not only the first student, but she was expelled from the school because they were having proms. And they decided that it would not be in the best interest of the school to let the African-American boys go to the prom. In protest of them not being able to go to the prom, she was expelled from Berea, so really never received her degree. On the other hand, she went back to Berea 1 or 2 years later and taught. She was a great musical prodigy, and she was probably the first African-American teacher at Berea. So she was a student at Berea, then she taught at Berea, and she came to Memphis and was a public school teacher here, and finally opened her own school called Hooks Scottish School of Music. It's been out of business now since long before my birth, but most of the prominent black Memphians of that day attended my grandmother's school. She was very active in civic and social affairs, led the protest movement, and never really subscribed to the concept of segregation. Obviously, being born in 1852, she lived during that period of time when Jim Crow was not as deterministic as it became later.
And she also lived during the imposition of Jim Crow.
Yes.
Right?
Lived during that time when it wasn't official, lived in the time when it was. And in the old days in commercial appeal, I used to read quite often Bygone Days, where she'd been arrested for attending an opera.
These are, for those listening, this is a part that the commercial appeal used to have where they put a paragraph or two from the newspaper of 50 years ago and 100 and 150 years ago.
25 years ago, and she was in that quite often. Well, she operated that school and had a great influence, and she was also, it was strange that she started a home for aged people. It was known as the Hooks Edwards Rest Home. And in fact, that's where she died. It was a strange and coincidental that she started that. They bought 11 acres of ground and built a beautiful home out there. I don't know what's happened to one of the things I've not followed through on. But I read about her in all the books that are written about early Memphis. Dr. Till Fuller, who was my pastor at First Baptist Church, Lauderdale, had a distinguished career. He had been a state senator in the state of North Carolina, the last black to serve, before he moved to Memphis, so that I came up in an environment of a man who was a very learned intellectual. He was a president of our little college here called Howell Institute, which is a Baptist college, and my pastor until 1942. And my grandmother played music all over town. My grandfather died before I was born. At one point, my grandmother and grandfather, Judy Hooks and Charles Hooks, ran the juvenile detention home for the city of Memphis, and my grandfather was killed in the service of the city as a juvenile detention officer by one of the inmates. And I can remember them discussing around the dinner table. My grandmother was such a proud woman, she would never ever accept any kind of donation or pension or any kind of compensation for the death of her husband, who died as a result of being shot in the service of the city. And my grandmother lived to be almost 90, 1 month short of 90. I never did ask her all the questions I should have. I had not had the benefit of educator's roots at that time, so I didn't know to ask what I could have asked had I known. But I do remember she had a very colorful career and was very, very well known in the city of Memphis. My grandmother, my mother's father was a waiter, and in that capacity, he did very well because he owned 3 or 4 pieces of property which were lost during the Depression, and owned some property in Huntsville, Alabama, which I sold for my mother in the 1950s. My mother only had one brother, Walter, and I can remember during the dark, lean, dreary days of Depression, and I almost hate to talk about the Depression because people who don't live through it don't know what a depression mentality is. They don't really know what suffering and privation. When people were literally selling apples on the street, and when any job, if you made 10 cents an hour, was a good job. Anything you could get that could give you some food on the table. And I remember in all of those years of the Depression, and I was a Depression child, being born in 25. Depression started with my father in 1929 and went on to about 40. So I had 10 years of Depression living. And my mother quite often would go into an old trunk where my grandfather on her side had put nickels and dimes and quarters from his waiting career. And I can remember that vividly during my childhood.
Now, the photography shop that your dad and your uncle, I guess, ran, as I understand it, that was carried on by one of your brothers?
Yes, actually my brother Charlie operated until his death, and my cousin Henry, the son of my uncle Henry, also had a photography studio, and Henry Jr. was a very gifted artist. I've never met a man who was more gifted in artistic work. He was a commercial sign painter, but he's also a gifted artist. And my brother was a gifted photographer, and they ran separate studios toward the end, but they were together some years back. But that photography studio, we had an unfortunate fire and lost some of the negatives, but I remember seeing pictures of Booker Washington and President Roosevelt, President Grant, my father and uncle made all of those kinds of pictures. One of these days, I hope we have those. We had old glass. We had a lot of glass negatives going back that far. I don't know how much has been saved. Unfortunately, my family stopped carrying on the business after the death of my brother Charlie, and there's a lot of history still in those files. And maybe one day somebody in the family would have the time to go through it, but I don't know when and if we will do it. We were doing it just before my brother Charlie died. We had a grant from one of the banks here during that exhibition. And it would have been tremendous because it was history of Black Memphis by people who were there. Not only Black Memphis, but all the surrounding territory. Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee, Rush College in Mississippi, the Barn Farm over in Arkansas. So much that happened. The church family of famous folklore here.
Well, you mentioned the surrounding area, and you know, to get a flavor of that era, the era you grew up in, certainly, my sense is that perhaps even more so than today, there was a very, very strong connection to the rural areas around Memphis that depended on Memphis and that Memphis depended upon. Was that your sense? Is that your sense?
Yes, Memphis was the trade area for western Tennessee and western Arkansas, and I think it's North Mississippi. We lost it due to some decisions I think the city fathers made. But that's another story for another time. But when I was a boy, you met the people who came to Memphis. They looked forward to it as the big lights, the big city. I had a lot of fun. The youngsters who lived on the farms in West Tennessee, Mississippi, and Arkansas dreamed about Memphis. And of course, the adults came here. Beale Street was famous, was swinging and jumping really in those days, because Beale Street and any other black street, for the most part, was always connected with Main Street. Those people who talk about folklore and who decry and who moan the loss of Beale Street forget it's connected with Main Street. When Main Street died, Beale Street had to die.
And I assume you mean that literally,
yes,
because I mean those of us who are, or those of us listening are in Memphis don't know.
They had a symbiotic relationship, and that was practically true in most cities. Black people came to Main Street to pay the light, gas, and water bill, the phone bills that had one, the renters that had it, to pay their little loans off and to buy their clothes. And when they finished, there was no place to use the restroom or to have a bite of food or to go to the movie to relax. So they left Main Street and went right down on Beale Street. And that was where all the talk about gambling and all of that is superfluous. It was where decent people went to enjoy themselves, to have a meal or so forth. And that's why Beale Street was originally famous. Yes, we had the nightclubs, and I was raised on Beale Street. At the age of 12, I almost moved down there with my father, so I remember the glory days. But it was a place where black people could relax, go to the movies, and do things that they could not do otherwise.
And also, weren't there some black professionals, for example, including your dad, who had their shops or lawyer offices or whatever on Beale?
Well, in those days, it was a custom in every city I've ever visited that on the main black street, all the lawyers and doctors and dentists were up on the second floor. On Beale Street, where I was raised, in that block between 2nd and 3rd, my father's studio was upstairs. There were several doctors. Of course, strange thing happened in Memphis in law. In the early days, you had people like B.F. Booth and William H. Foote, for whom the Foote Holmes the name, and Settle and Trigg. But by the time I came back to Memphis to practice in 1949, there was only one black lawyer here, and that was A.A. Ladin. But when I was a boy, there were 3 or 4 lawyers still active on Beale Street. In the building where my father's studio was, at 164 Beale, there was a black doctor, a black dentist, a black lawyer, a pharmacist, and then a little place where the preachers had an office. So I was raised looking at the dentist, at the doctor, the pharmacist, at the lawyer, and Dr. Patterson, who was the black doctor in the building, was also the moving spirit behind what we call the Tri-State Fair. And that was a fair. You mentioned the rural areas where all of the people in this area came together. And when the white fair was held one week, the Mid-South Fair, then a week later would come the Tri-State Fair, where the black people brought their hogs and cows and sheep and cattle and also their canned goods and all of that. They brought it into town. And in the same place where the white fair had been held a week before would be the big black fair. That was a great, great time in the history of Memphis.
Much like, I suppose, the Cotton Carnival each
Yes,
day and the Cotton Makers Jubilee.
I had an unusual experience of being in the building where Dr. Patterson, the leading force of the Tri-State Fair, was located, and I used to hear the talk all the time and see the meetings. And then when I was in high school, and Dr. and Mrs. Vincent started the Cotton Makers Jubilee, much misunderstood and criticized, but it shouldn't have been, because it was a protest movement, really. At that time, if you went to the Cotton Carnival, the only black folk you'd see would be black men in a white smock leading a mule. And Dr. Vincent's little nephew asked him one day, "Daddy, why aren't there any blacks represented except leading mules?" And so the Cotton Maker Jubilee started off as really a protest movement and a day of segregation. That was about 34, 35.
And for those who are listening who are not familiar with Memphis, the Cotton Carnival in its day was a sort of different version maybe of, I hate to say Mardi Gras. But
yeah, what it was, I think maybe an outgrowth of Mardi Gras, the Depression era syndrome, something to give people hope. All over the world, wherever I've been, there are carnivals and dances and jamborees and jubilees, so it's a human expression to have a time of joy, even in great sorrow. So the Cotton Carnival came along to extol cotton, which was king. However much we may hate cotton now, it was the cash crop of the South. It was the thing that produced, in my judgment, slavery and kept it alive, because it took a lot of intensive labor to do it, and so a lot of black folk didn't want to have anything to do with celebrating cotton. But I can remember, as like it was yesterday, in 1948, 49, when I started practicing law, 25,000 black people left this town every morning going to pick cotton and chop cotton. It was economic salvation. So I don't like to get tied up in obtuse subjects that confuse cause and effect. The fact of the matter is that cotton was king, and black people left here in the late 40s. In my lifetime, when I got involved in a peculiar way, black men and women were taking trucks over. The planters paid you $1 per person. Now, if you had a big bus that held 40 people, you got $40.
Just for transporting workers to the farm.
And that was a lot of money in 1949. Then they gave you another $1 if you helped to keep up with them. And then on the back of the truck, they'd have a big lemonade barrel and sandwiches, so that a good bus driver could make about $100, $120 a day in 1949. Lawyers were not making that much in my community. And so a big explosion came because I won't call a name for a reason, but a taxi cab company operated by whites decided this was too good a market, $25,000 every day going over there, so they tried to stop the black folk that were driving the buses from going because they did not have interstate commerce licenses. So as a young lawyer, I was hired by the bus drivers to represent them and make sure that they could continue driving those buses. We had men who owned buses that looked like school buses that held 40 people. I knew one man that owned 5. So he could make a gross about $600 a day doing cotton picking and cotton chopping season. Remember, those are 2 different seasons. And I remember being in that legal battle, first found out about the power of regulatory agencies in the early 50s, representing black men who wanted to continue. Some of them only had a big limousine.
Was this before the Interstate Commerce Commission?
That was where the fight was being carried on, because the cab company wanted to license, these trucks, and the black people obviously did not have licenses. But in all of my understanding of those years, I don't ever recall a catastrophe. I don't ever recall a major wreck. I don't ever recall having any problem. But it was a lucrative economic thing. I understand 25,000 people being transported. If a man only owned a big old-time limousine that held 9 people, he could make $18. $9 for the transport, and then $9 for helping to supervise, and then maybe another $1 for selling the sandwiches. So even $27 a day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week was a lot of money. And well, what happened during that long fight, and we did keep the fight going, then cotton picking became rather obsolete. We developed cotton picking machines, and mechanization changed the face of the cotton industry, and But during that time, it was a very interesting experiment and was a tremendous economic boom.
Were you successful in representing the drivers?
We didn't ever win the case. We never lost it. One of those
but then not losing was probably winning.
Yes, where you know the old joke about you settled that case, boy, you sent you through law school. We didn't expect to win. We only expect to keep the controversy alive and prevent them from enjoining us from having the black drivers from doing it. We did, however, come to the place where we felt that there was no reason why some of these vehicles could not receive interstate commerce licenses. Remember, we were talking about transporting people in Mississippi, Arkansas, and I think they called the Boot Hill section of Missouri up around Haiti. That's how far this cotton picking industry went. And more there than in the rural counties of West Tennessee, because in the rural counties of West Tennessee you had quite a number of black people still living.
Let me move you back a minute to your childhood a bit. You talked a little bit about some of the people that you knew, adults you knew, who were leaders in the community, your pastor and doctors and others. Were there any lawyers who you knew as a child or had exposure to who you looked up to or were any sort of role model in that sense?
Well, in my building, the doctor was there, the dentist was there, the pharmacist was there, the preachers had a meeting place there, an office they had, and of course there was a lawyer. And I always respected him and looked forward one day to practicing law. Now, historically, B.F. Booth was one of the great appellate lawyers of Memphis, and I recall reading it not too long ago that on the day that Booth died, and it seems to me that might have been in the 40s, that the courts declared a recess, mourning period for Booth, who had practiced law here, I guess, 60 or 70 years at the time he died. William Foote, the Foote Holmes name for him, was a very prominent lawyer. Those two I remember, and another lawyer is J.T. Settle and A.A. Trigg. I knew all of them, but not as well as I knew Lawyer Marshall, who was in my building.
How old were you as a child when you really became aware in some sense of segregation?
Oh, it's difficult to say. I can't remember a time when I didn't know it.
Because it was such an ingrained part of the way the black community existed?
I don't quite remember how we got into it, but
tell me a little.
I can't remember a time when I did not know.
Tell me a little again about during your childhood, and I think you've just talked a good bit about it, but about the relationship between the black community and the white community in this city during that period of time.
Well, segregation was a way of life here, and it was brutal, unyielding, and.
But yet, you mentioned in the 1940s that the courts closed in honor of a deceased black lawyer.
Yes, that was something I read recently. I have no empirical proof of it. I've forgotten to ask anybody. I just read that as a mark of respect to B.F. Booth, but that was in the early 40s apparently, because I came back in 49, and at that point A.A. Latin was the only African-American lawyer here.
Well, let me, I want to come back to that, but let me, for the sake of a little continuity, ask you about your education. Now, you mentioned earlier Booker T. Washington, and as I understand it, you went to the public schools in Memphis.
Yes, I attended what was then called Porter Grammar School and Booker Washington High School and Lemoyne College, which is now known as Lemoyne Owen College. I left here and went to the Army and went to Howard, and then did some work in the Army, what they call the University Training Command in Florence, Italy. There were a group of us waiting. I was in the 92nd Infantry Division, and we concluded the war in Italy fairly early, even before the war in Europe. And we were all waiting to go to Japan to finish up that war, and probably die. That's what we figured if we got over there. And to keep us pacified, and during that period between the end of the war in Italy and the end of the war in Japan, it may have been 3 or 4 or 5 months, I don't quite, they started the school. And those of us who had been to college had a chance to attend school in the Army in Florence, Italy. I had been to Howard before I went overseas, but I went to school, and they had the classes at the University of Florence, but it was called UTC, University Training Command, and they had very prominent professors from colleges in America came over and taught during that time.
Let me ask you about your Army experience a little bit. Now, this was the day of the segregated armed forces.
Yes.
And you were in the Army.
Yes.
You were in the infantry, as I understand it. Now, was the division, you said the 92nd Division, was the 92nd Division a black division then?
Yes. In terms of enlisted men, I think they had an unwritten rule that any officer above the rank of captain had to be white. I don't recall a single black major. We had several first, second lieutenants and captains who were African Americans, but all the ranking officers, the division commander, the assistant division commander, and the colonel, regimental commanders, and battalion commanders were all white.
Now, I'm a bit of a student of history, but not that close to one of the Italian campaign. My understanding is that the 92nd Division would have been in some reasonably serious combat. Is that right?
Yes, we were over during the combat period. That was a part of what they called then the Fifth Army. Mark Clark was the commander general of the Fifth Army. They'd been the army that had started off in Africa, that Eisenhower led. When Eisenhower branched off to go to Europe, they turned the command of the Fifth Army to finally to Mark Clark. And it was in the Italian campaign that the 92nd Division went into combat. We were not in the African campaign. And there were only 2 combat divisions of black soldiers in World War II for some strange reason. 92nd Division and 93rd was over in the Japanese state of Europe. I mean, Japanese state of operations. So that yes, we were involved in combat. So went up on the front lines on Halloween night of 1944, and stayed up there until the war ended.
Historians who've written about that period often talk about the effect that service in the armed forces had upon black Americans who served, generally because they served, but also because of the segregated nature of the Army. And they sometimes talk about the effect that that had on, I'm sure I'm not using the right word, but sort of broadening the horizons of some black soldiers, and how that might have been related to later developments in the civil rights movement. Do you see any connections between the experience black Americans had in the Army and some of the events that took place in our society in the 40s and 50s?
From the NAACP perspective, which was my background, and I had been involved in at Lemoyne College, there was never any doubt in our mind that we wanted complete and full integration. The only question was when it would come and how. There was never any question about where we stood from 1909 when the association started until this good day. Other people may have had doubts, but the NAACP did not. And of course the Army was a bitter experience with many, many, many bitter moments for black soldiers who in many instances were treated worse than captured prisoners of war. So that embittered a lot of people.
I understand you guarded prisoners of war at one point in your career. Is that right?
Yes,
in the Army?
And at a time when I guarded them, and they went to the restaurant to eat, I had to stay on the outside to make sure they didn't escape.
These were what, Italian prisoners of war?
Yes.
And you were in Georgia, I think?
In Georgia at the time, yes. So that for me personally was never any question that I was a soldier, that I was a good soldier, never any question about my patriotism, my love for the country, never any doubt in my mind that in spite of segregation, I was an American citizen and was determined to somehow break out of that rut that the majority had put me into. I guess it was strange, more in gambling than in church, that when you came back from overseas on one of those big ships, white and black soldiers gambled from the day the ship left Italy till they got over here, and maybe taking off 5 minutes to nap, and there was more camaraderie and fraternity around the gambling table. That's when I first learned that white people could shoot dice with such great skill. And I didn't realize that they tried to make me believe it was a black skill.
I hope that lesson didn't cost you much money.
Well, at that time, I was too jealously guarding what I had. I wasn't about to risk it. In fact, all the talk about crap shooting, I never really understood the game. I understood a little bit about it, but all the way they did, money changed hands so fast. There's no way. I had $2,000 or $3,000 in 1945, and no way I was going to let anybody get that from me. And I didn't think I was going that I could win. But it was an amazing experience to see all the barriers drop when it came to gambling. And I saw them gamble until they almost fell out of the table, and they'd lay on the floor and sleep and get back up and start, black and white. I saw then, however, that in my own mind that white soldiers were full of prejudice and all that kind of thing, but they did have to experience things from the South they had never experienced before. The Army was a terrible place in terms of that, and of course the thing that's so peculiar about the Army, and I talk about the Army more than anything else because I was a part of it, is how they proved if you really want to make a change, you can do it. I hear all the excuses for it, but starting from Truman's executive order in 1948 until 1990, 96, when you had Colin Powell as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it's obvious that the armed forces, with all of their mistakes, have done more in terms of integration than any facet of American life, more than universities, certainly more than the profession of law. It's just no comparison between what has been done and successfully, which leads me to believe that if we really wanted to finish the job, we could do it.
Let me move you back to that troopship for a minute. When you were demobilized in from the Army, I guess might be the way to put it, did you have any doubt in your mind about what you wanted to do with yourself at that point?
No.
What did you want to do?
I wanted to go to law school, become a lawyer. I thought I might, because of the crippling circumstances of that blacks have been placed in, very difficult to explain how you feel when you come up in a society which closes all the doors in your face. I knew good and well that I could not go to law school in Memphis or Mississippi.
At that time, where were the law schools in Tennessee? Do you remember?
They had one here in Memphis. I think it was Southern University Law School, or was either Memphis Law School. That was a law school here, I'm not sure.
And then there was Vanderbilt in Nashville,
Vanderbilt,
University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
And University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
And Cumberland, perhaps?
I think there was a YMCA law school in Nashville, which had night classes. I didn't know about it until later. But they had night classes in Memphis. And had I been white, there'd been no question I'd come right back and gone to law school. When I came back, I had to decide where I could go and what I could do and how I could work it out. And but that was minor. I knew that I was going somewhere. I had attended Howard, which had a very fabulous and famed law school, and really, I suppose the majority of lawyers I ever heard of at that time were graduates of Howard, unless they had read law. And of course, we did have the business of reading law in those early days when you didn't have to go to law school, just go to some lawyer's office and stay around there and clerk for 4 or 5 years and then take the bar exam.
Well, how did you settle on, I think you went to DePaul in Chicago, is that right?
Yes.
Is that right? And how did you settle on going there to law school?
Well, basically because not being able to attend anywhere in the South. Chicago may have been the closest place geographically. Couldn't go to St. Louis. They were segregated. I thought that Chicago might have been the closest place geographically where I could get a law degree, number one. Number two, my brother, I had a brother who lived there, so I could go there and stay with him while I looked around and saw what the situation was all about. And it was those two things that caused me to go to Chicago.
As a native Memphian, I guess I have to ask, were you ever, I hate to use this verb, it'll show my biases, but were you ever tempted to, for example, stay in Chicago or go somewhere else to practice law rather than coming home to Memphis?
Not really. I decided that I wanted to make a big lick against segregation. And I felt like, rightly or wrongly, my own sense of timing told me it was going to be in the South. I must say I didn't quite know how it was going to be done, because NAACP had been involved in these cases where they'd come to the decision that since Plessy versus Ferguson said separate but equal, and since most southern states had a medical school and had a law school, engineering school, and schools that gave master's degrees and PhDs, that we would break the system down economically, that we would demand entrance into the law school. If you decide to build a law school for blacks, you go ahead and do it, but it had to be equal with the white. Now this is Depression time, 1930s.
Well, these were the predecessor cases to Brown versus
Yes,
Ford.
oh yes, which most people don't pay any attention to, but the NAACP was involved in trying to break down the segregation in the, but we did it in a backward way. In other words, we applied for admission to the white schools. The theory being that if they decided to build a black medical school in 13 southern states, a black law school, a black engineering school, and I'm talking about the late 30s, they'd go broke. So they'd have to, the Supreme Court would have to say, well, since you don't have a law school left for blacks, then they've got to go to the white law school. That was the theory that lawyers used. It didn't work out for many, many reasons. First of all, the southern states hit on something where they would say to the black student, we'll pay your way to Harvard, Yale, or Stanford, anywhere you want to go. We'll pay your train fare and your room and board and tuition. Just don't bother us about going to school down there. Well, what happened with a lot of students who really wanted to practice law, practice medicine, they had to figure out, do I want to spend 10 years fighting it, or go ahead and go to school? And then the NAACP cases never did quite work out. It took so long. And at some point, Oklahoma, where they admitted a black to the law school, it was only after they had built a law school. They went down to the state capitol and took some unused rooms in the attic and said, here is the University of Oklahoma Law School for blacks. And had the Supreme Court said that won't work. But look how long it took to do that. And then when they admitted this black man to law school, they made it very clear you can't sit in the classroom. You have to sit outside the door. You can't ask questions, and the professor will never ask you anything. You must not commingle with the class. You must come to that room and sit outside the door, hear what you can, and when the class breaks up, you must leave before all the students can mingle. The Supreme Court said that won't work, but that's a long, long time. So for a youngster who wanted to practice law, you had to decide, did you want to spend 8 or 10 years, getting into law school? And your white compatriots would be rich or broke or famous or infamous by that time. Either be judges or in jail. And you out there trying. So when I came out, the state of Tennessee approached me, and I would not accept it. I don't know whether I should say I would not accept it. I didn't bother with it because I was a soldier and I had the GI Bill of Rights.
What did they offer, or what was available?
Well, they were offering the same thing: tuition to any school I chose, room and board, but I did not take it. And that's why I don't have any problem, with affirmative action. I hear all these foolish people arguing about it makes you a second-class citizen. That 12 million GIs took the GI Bill of Rights, and I've never heard one say, I feel bad because my brother couldn't get in the Army and he didn't get this. We took it. We took our GI Bill of Rights. We took the education. We took what they let us have for insurance. We accepted the difference they gave us. When you went to the post office, you got a little extra because you've been I mean, affirmative action has been with America as long as I've been able to live. But only when it affected black people did all of a sudden it become a bad thing and an awful thing and a thing, badge of inferiority, and you don't want to be an affirmative action kid. Well, every GI I knew is an affirmative action. All these lawyers that came along with me, most of them went to law school under the GI Bill of Rights, and they've never felt bad about it. They've never offered to pay the money back. They've never offered, and why did you have the GI Bill of Rights? Best thing, one of the best things that ever happened in this country, because they said, we took 2 years of your life, and in order to compensate you, we're going to do this, that, and the other. Well, black folk could say, you took all my life. And what compensation? You took my life, my mother's life, my father's life. My father couldn't go to medical school. He had been a great doctor, but the medical school was not open. So, I mean, I don't want to belabor that. I'm simply saying that the reason that I was able to fulfill my ambition at that point was because of the war and the GI Bill of Rights.
Just one further thing about that. How did the state of Tennessee know that you were interested in going to law school?
I guess they must have been like the State Sovereignty Commission in Mississippi. I got a letter.
Just out of the blue?
I got a letter from Tennessee Department of Education welcoming me back to Memphis and asking if they could help me in any way.
That's interesting.
And I guess they then they had a little impersonal kind of letter.
So you weren't the only Tennessean.
Yeah, they gave the
letter.
benefits. I don't know quite how they got a hold of it, whether I had already enrolled in DePaul. I can't remember that well. I just remember getting a letter setting forth certain information.
I want to step back into chronology for a minute and introduce another important player in your life. As I understand it, somewhere around the period of time we're talking about, you met someone who actually is present here with us today, your wife. Is that, if I got the timing about right?
Yes. Well,
Tell us about your wife.
My wife is a native Memphian, and was raised in very affluent circumstances. Her father was able to take a job of being a bellhop, they used to call him, bellman now, in the hotel, and educated his 3 children. All of them got postgraduate degrees. Lived in a house that had indoor plumbing, bathtub, and all of that. I didn't come up under that circumstance. I didn't have hot and cold running water in my house. And for many years, brought all the water in the house from an outdoor hydrant. But my wife attended and graduated from Fisk University, which is one of the really top-ranked historically black universities in the nation, and came back to Memphis and got, at that time, the only job available for the most part for black women, no matter how brilliant that was, teaching school in a segregated system. In fact, she started at the top. I always give her credit for that, in a little 2-room schoolhouse where she was assistant principal. She taught from the 1st through the 4th, and the other teacher taught 5th through 8th.
Now, your wife's name, just so everybody
Frances Louise Dancy, and now Frances Louise Dancy Hooks. And we've been married 47 years as of now.
Long marriages run in your family, at least, I gather.
Yes, well, I have a brother who I think just celebrated his 50th, and my brother who died was in about his 45th, and the boys in the family were stayed married a long time, longer than the girls.
Okay, well, I'm not sure we want to go into that for this history question, but let me move to your early career as a lawyer, if we could. Now, one thing I want to ask you about, you had mentioned that growing up in Memphis, there were a number of black lawyers, not just 1 or 2, but that by the time you started practicing, there was really only 1 other practicing black lawyer in town. Is that right?
That's right,
And that was?
A.A. Latin.
Okay. Was he getting on in years by that time, or?
No, I don't think so. When I came back in '49, I think Mr. Latin was about 40 maybe.
Okay.
He practiced here after I came back at least 30 years, I would think.
Did you have a close relationship with him?
Very close.
Did y'all practice law nearby, or?
Yes. When I started, I would have started in his office, but he had 1 available space, and he had promised it to another young black man who was maybe 2 years behind me. And finally, he moved to 362 Beale, and at 362, we were in the same office. We were not partners, but we were
sharing office
space and telephone and secretarial service. And he had a good library. And he was perhaps, of all the lawyers I've ever known, I think A.A. Latin was the most brilliant lawyer I've ever known in my life. White, black, red, green, yellow, brown, male, female.
Tell me why, what comes, when you think of that, I'm sure there's something he told you or some case he had or some experience you had with him that comes to mind. Tell me.
Well, it was that because when I came back, I think that one of the things that brought Mr. Latin here was the fact that black lawyers had such a difficult time. You couldn't be an assistant public defender, you couldn't be an assistant divorce proctor, you couldn't be an assistant prosecutor, you had no help at all.
Those are traditional places where lawyers would start out.
If I were given the bitterness, I would think about all the opportunities that I did not have. And I see all the lawyers who, during their time in law school, were working in the clerk's office, criminal court clerk's office, or somewhere down the courthouse, or were working with the tax assessor, working with this group, that group. When they finished school and passed the bar examination, as they start out to practice, they could get a part-time job that assured them of at least making a living while they, got their act together, if they were not lucky enough to go into a law firm. And of course, in '49, law firms were not as big as they are now, and there were many more individual practitioners. We had not entered to the age of specialization, so that a black lawyer starting off in the South had none of the traditional advantages. We could not look to any help from any sort. And then there were very few black businesses big enough to even afford you a little apprenticeship in corporate law. And Mr. Ladden, I think, may have come here among other reasons because we had a college here. And he taught business law and political science at the college level. He was a graduate of Fisk and Northwestern. That's where he got his law degree. Brilliant young man. And when he first came here, he was teaching at the college level as well as practicing law. And I think that lawyers of his day in the 30s went to cities where they could find something to do besides just because entering the practice of law, the Depression age was a very difficult thing. And most lawyers, if their father, uncle, or brother was not already in the practice, had to have some way to have a hand up. Some of them had full-time jobs and practice law, but most of them had part-time jobs. And Mr. Ladden was doing exceptionally well. He was a brilliant lawyer, and all the time I knew him, and he handled so many cases. And when I had difficult cases, I always went to Mr. Ladden, and we sort of partnered on those cases.
Do you remember either your first case or your first client when you opened up your practice?
Yes, let me go off the record just for a minute.
Oh, sure.
I need to go.
Absolutely. We were just talking a little bit about the early days of your law practice. Do you remember either your first case or your first client?
Oh yes, I remember my first case very vividly. One of the things that always interested me is when I see what lawyers make now. In 1949, which is almost 50. In fact, I finished law school September '48, which is 50 years ago. I was admitted to the bar in Illinois in October '48, which is 50 years ago this month, maybe this day, I'm not quite sure. And I came and started practicing in Memphis in February of 1949. And I remember I had a couple of months to get an office ready. And I inherited the office that the lawyer in my building had, Lawyer Marshall. Remember, 1949 is still rigid, unyielding, undeviating segregation. And one of the advantages I had was Lawyer Marshall, he only had one room. But he had a lot of books, code and this, that, and the other, and big old roll-top desk. And I remember remodeling his office, and that consists of painting, putting new linoleum down. But I had an advantage because my father's photography studio was in the same building, so I could let my clients, if I had plural, sitting over in his reception room and not in the office. Well, in Lawyer Marshall's time, if two people came at the same time, he'd have to talk at one in the corner and have one sitting in the other corner. But in those days, a divorce cost, uncontested divorce was $50 attorney fee and $16 for court costs. And one of the things I had tried to find out, the Bar Association had just put out this little pamphlet giving the cost that you should charge for an adoption and legitimation, for consultation. I think it was $5 for a half hour, $10 for a full hour. And the first client I had came in and wanted a divorce. And in those days, I don't know whether it's changed much now or not, law schools taught you zip about practice of law. They taught you all the theory, and when the man came in and said, "Want a divorce," I was very optimistic. I said, "Yes, sir, we can handle that for you." I said, "How long you all been separated?" And he said, "Oh, about 30 years." I said, "Well, it's going to be uncontested then. She's not going to fight it. It's no. So that would be $50. And the only thing I knew about divorce was how to write a receipt. I had a little book, and he gave me $66 that day. And I had about as much idea about what to do to get that man divorced as somebody who just landed over here and couldn't speak a word of English. I had no concept at all. And I remember running down to Mr. Lattin's office, and he did have a very busy practice, and for 2 or 3 days, he was actually too busy to give me any help on it. And my distress was growing obvious because I knew the man was coming back. And his secretary said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I got to get this man a divorce." Jean Gilliland, I will never forget her as long as I live. And she took a piece of legal scratch paper, wrote on there what I was to ask. You know, name, address, birth date, name, address, date of birth of the wife, name, address of the time of the marriage, name and place of the time of the marriage, any children born, did she leave him or did he leave her, and blah, 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 blah. And I went back, I was so businesslike, and when my client came back in, you know, taking down the information, and she had told me, said, "Now you get this information, bring it back down here, and I'll type you up a bill of divorce." So I got the information, and luckily for me, she had asked me enough questions that I got enough answers. I went down that day, and she typed up the bill of divorce for me, and I had to, you know, take it back and get it signed. So that's how I got introduced to the practice of law. And I often wondered about that. There had been no black lawyer. I guess I would have had to find some white lawyer who would have been able, because it's I had an excellent record, and it was because I had a lot of help. All of my pleadings were in order. They were done right. They were typed up correctly. And Miss Jean Gilliland, I will never forget that happy lady who helped me get my start in practice of law.
You mentioned the Memphis Bar Association's fee schedule, I guess is the best way to put it. Tell me about the relationship of I guess at that time 2 black lawyers, but other black lawyers before and after you, with the Memphis Bar in those days.
Well, I don't think at that point there had ever been a time when black lawyers could belong to the Bar Association, just the way of the South. In fact, I've been given to understand that there were counties in Mississippi and other parts of the South where black lawyers were really discouraged from practicing as such. They could draw documents in their office, but that they've been discouraged from appearing in court. I don't have any knowledge that was true. This was just a folklore. But because of people like Booth and Settle and Foote and Lattin, all of my life I knew that black lawyers could go to court in Memphis and argue their cases, present their cases before courts here and in the appellate and Supreme Court. In fact, Booth was very noted as a appellate court lawyer. I think one of the reasons they closed the courthouse for him was because he had helped many, many white lawyers in their appellate procedure. He was a gifted lawyer, I've given to understand, as Lattin was to be later. So that the little pamphlet that I got a hold to, and I wanted it because I wanted to see this fee schedule. And I don't think they'd been doing it too long. It was word of mouth before that.
This was a minimum fee schedule?
Minimum fee schedule. I have it around the house somewhere now, but it started off with the Constitution of the Bar Association. It started off by saying in the preamble that this Memphis and Shepherd County Bar Association will be open to all white lawyers practicing this vicinity. So that hit me direct in the face as soon as I got here. And that remained in effect for years and years and years. We simply could not belong to the, and black doctors could not belong to the American Medical Association. Black dentists did not belong to the American Dental. It was a two-tier system, so that we had the national bar, the national medical, the national dental. Our black organization was known as national rather than American. And I understand there may have been some cities, I don't know, up north where blacks could get into the Bar Association, but few and far between. But here, it was understood absolutely was a no-no, which meant that you were not free to use the law library, and of course there was so much segregation and prejudice.
That would be the law library that today still the Bar Association maintains at the courthouse for all lawyers.
Courthouse for all lawyers. And of course, for a young lawyer, it's important to be exposed to the books. Mr. Lattin had a very good library, and I had inherited one, but those days you didn't have any computers, so we had to do what we call shepherdized cases. And I'm bragging, I didn't lose any cases, because I discovered that there were a lot of lazy lawyers in Memphis. Good people with lazy lawyers, and Lattin taught me from the very first, always be prepared. We never went to case, anything contested, that we had not exhausted the law exhaustively. And that's why I said Lattin was such a good lawyer. I don't recall him losing any cases, frankly, because he prepared his cases well. He had done the preliminary work. He had the citations. He was an excellent speaker, orator, very persuasive with jurors and with the court, and he taught me in that tradition. And when I got into the real fight of my life, it was in the civil rights field, when we were trying cases over here in the federal court. And of course, you know, the downside was that in those days, black lawyers were never accorded a courtesy to tightly walk in the courtroom. That's why, to this day, I say A.A. Lattin. He never gave his first name. They couldn't call him whatever it was, Augustus or Office. I don't know what his first name was. I can't remember right now. And I never used Ben. I always used B.L. and all the other black, H.T. Lockett, B.F. Jones.
When did that change for you? When did you start going by
When I went on the
Benjamin?
bench. Okay. It was 1965, 64 when Governor Clement, right. Frank G. Clement appointed me to the bench, and you thought that the earthquake, that all the earthquakes had ever come together hit. The lawyers here almost died. They said the very idea of a lawyer being appointed to a judgeship without going through the bar primary. It's been a custom here for years and years and years that when a vacancy occurred, that the governor would, as a matter of courtesy, ask the Shelby County Bar Association to conduct a bar primary.
And by that, just so everybody outside of Memphis understands, you mean that the local lawyers who were members of the Memphis Bar would vote on who they wanted to be judge?
Not the Memphis Bar, the Memphis Bar Association.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Yeah. You see, because you can be a member of the Memphis Bar, and not all white lawyers belong to the Bar Association for one reason or another. But the Memphis and Shelby County Bar Association, as an organization of dues-paying lawyers, conducted the primary, and if you wanted to be a judge, you would submit your name, and they would vote on you. And apparently, historically, and I remember part of it, it's been many years that the governor had not appointed the winner of the primary. They called it the Memphis and Shelby County Bar Association primary. Not every lawyer, and I'm not talking about just black lawyers, but because the time I went on the bench, there were maybe 7 or 8, maybe 10 black lawyers here. None of us belonged to the Bar Association. But the white lawyers in the 50s didn't all belong, but those who did belong conducted the primary. And the fact of the matter is that my mind slipped just a little bit. It may have been that by 65, when I was appointed, I was actually appointed in 64. It may have been that in 64, 1 or 2 black lawyers had been admitted. I'm not quite sure.
To the Memphis Bar Association?
To the Memphis Bar Association. I'm not quite sure.
But that would have been a recent development.
If it had happened, it had happened only a year or 2 before that. And Governor Clement was well aware of the political situation in Memphis, and when he decided he wanted a black person on the bench, he called me and said if I wanted it, I could have it, and he announced the appointment. And rather than say they didn't want a black judge, they said he should have been submitted himself to the Bar Association. Of course, I didn't say anything except to say, well, you know, it's passing strange to myself that you want me to come before the Bar Association. I couldn't even be a member if I could be just maybe a year or 2 before that. How would I fare against 300, 500, or 700, however number of white lawyers there were? Well, it was a great shock to the whole city because no black well, in fact, Memphis is a strange city even today. they don't brag much on what they've done. You take Atlanta, got the kudos for being a great city in terms of progress, but actually Memphis led Atlanta. Black leaders from Memphis used to come to, from Atlanta used to come to Memphis to talk with A.W. Willis and Russell Sugarman and George Lee and Ben Hooks about how to make progress. But if you ask Memphis to talk about it, they don't know what happened. I don't know.
You're referring to the sort of traditional inferiority complex Memphis seems to have.
Memphis has an inferiority complex about whatever it does, and if they do it, they never want to brag about it. Actually, from all the research we've done, when Frank Clement appointed me to the bench, it was a period of time before I assumed office, because he appointed me in '64, and I didn't take office until '65. But during that time, the research we had indicated there was no black judge anywhere in the South on a court of record. There were one or two judges who'd been in city court or general session, but no, you know what I mean by court of record, and lawyers understand that means where your decisions are appealable and have to be appealed.
So you were then the first black judge in a court of record anywhere in the South.
Anywhere in the South.
And in Tennessee,
at least since Reconstruction. I don't try to deal with the Reconstruction period because I don't know what happened then everywhere.
And as I understand it, even in Tennessee, you were at that time that was the highest judicial position that a black person had achieved in the judicial system, period, not and including Reconstruction.
That's right, and then that was in the entire South. But at that time, I was pastoring a church in Detroit, and Detroit is viewed as one of the places where black political progress has been simply amazing, and it's just a fact. But at that time, in Detroit, Judge Davenport and Judge Farmer were the only two black judges in that city and county. In Wayne County, they only had two black judges, so that was a scarcity of black judges anywhere in this country, not just the. I can remember the first black man ever appointed to a federal bench was he died at the Second Circuit level, but he was appointed judge down in the Virgin Islands, and later became a. So that in my lifetime, I saw the first black man become a federal judge.
Let me back you up for a minute to your practice, and I want to go back to that for a minute, and then we're going to come back to your judicial career. Tell me a little about the relations between lawyers while you were practicing, lawyers who were black and lawyers who were white. I take it you had many, many cases, virtually all your cases probably were with white lawyers.
Well, yeah, very, very seldom to have a contest with a black lawyer, and a great number of my cases was uncontested in those days, but they were contested. They were always against white lawyers. I don't ever recall having a case before a judge. And of course, the clerk's office was very, very. It's hard to talk about it now. You'd go there and the clerk would simply overlook you. Any white lawyer that came anytime after you got there, a white layperson asking the question would be waited on before you. Over the years, Gertrude Decker was in the probate court clerk's office, and it was unusual because they were very fair. Whoever came in first got waited on first, and she had a very close relationship with Latin, and we the only office at that time where you felt free to chat, how you're feeling. The talk.
The normal talk among clerks and lawyers.
Normal people talking. But over the years, it developed in all of the clerks' offices that we developed friendships with at least one or two individual clerks. But the system, and I don't really, I try to deal with the fact that it was a system that they were upholding. They upheld it rigorously. And I remember H.T. Lockett, that was a court room. H.T. Lockett was a black lawyer who started short after I did, and who became a judge. Judge on the same bench. I was on. It's strange. I went to Criminal Court Division 4, and when I resigned, Odell Horton took my place, and when he resigned, Otis Higgs took his place. I was instrumental in getting both of them appointed, and then after
Odell Horton, of course, became a federal judge
after that, and Higgs is back on the bench now after a very successful practice. Lockett, I think, went to that bench, but we've only had black judges there. Strange
and that was,
circumstance.
and your point being that that position was created when you
Yeah, well,
filled
what
it, right?
happened, when I came to Memphis to practice law, there were only two divisions of criminal court. Sellers was in Division 1 and Campbell was in Division 2. And then they created a third division where Faquin went. And then the load got heavy and they created a fourth division. And when they created the fourth division, that's when Governor Clement, I have to Clement, because of my president, Governor Clement appointed me to the circuit, but now Judge Blackett sits there. So it's
Judge
strange,
Carolyn Wade
Blackett. It's strange that every judge of that division has been a black judge, not for any particular reason, except it just happened that way. When I went on the bench, it was such a happy time, and hundreds of thousands of black citizens rejoiced. They never thought they'd live to see it. You know, having been born in those terrible days, and it took a man like Frank Clement to do it. History will not record as much as they should about his activity in the black community, some of the things he did. But Frank Clement did it, and it caught everybody by surprise, including me. And it was a major advance, and the black people in Memphis were so excited about it that 3 or 4 years later, when I decided to leave the bench, it became imperative that I not leave unless another black took the position. I could not afford to leave, and I could not afford to leave the bench and not be replaced by another black person. It just would have been, it would have toned down the morale, and been so that I had to go back and forth to see Governor Ellington 2 or 3 times. And of course, Odell Horton was a very fine lawyer, and he had some other outstanding white lawyers who were pushing for him, including a lawyer here named Mr. Charlie Black, who was very high up in the Democratic circles. So, but and then when Judge Horton decided to leave, I was pushing Otis Higgs, and he became judge. Well, it was a funny thing, because in all of that kind of situation of obvious racism, there were 4 judges who sat on the circuit court bench. At that time, we only had 4: Henderson and Holmes and Wilson and Adams, and 2 that sat on the criminal court bench, and that was Campbell and Sellers. And I think we had Judge Bacon and Hoffman, and there had been one, not Hoffman who became chancellor, but another Hoffman in the
Chancery
General Sessions.
Oh, General Sessions, excuse me.
And Bijak and who was it? Bijak and whoever, Creason, I think. And you know, in all the years I practiced law before I went on the bench, in all the years I practiced law, there was never one time, not one time, that I ever felt that I was mistreated because I was a black lawyer, which is a tribute to those.
By that, do you
people.
mean by the court?
By the court, by the judges. I didn't have the feeling that I could go, and you know, it's a funny thing. 2 black lawyers, Jones and Lockett, talked about it. When you're a lawyer, the feeling of camaraderie with other lawyers and judges is important. Knowing there's a line between judges and lawyers, you still want to be able to have a relationship. And I never felt when I went to the courthouse that I could, you know, go and see the judges. And yet every time I had to go see one, I was treated very courteously. But it's the upbringing and all, so that when I was in the courtroom and I named those 4 judges, and I named the 2 chancellors and the criminal court judges and the General Sessions judge, never one time, not one time did I feel that I was discriminated against because I was a black lawyer. I was always listened to courteously. I've had white lawyers who didn't know any more about law than a lion would, you know, flying a spaceship, who argued vigorously with me in court. And the judge would look at him and say, "Don't you understand? You're not quoting the law. Hooks is right. Go get your law books." One time in General Sessions Court, Judge Hoffman said, "Go get your law book and read it. I'm tired you keep on saying that. Did you hear what Hook said?" You know? And it happened to me in several courts. And so it's a tribute to the quality of lawyers that we had who sat as judges that I never had that feeling. Now, when we dealt with the federal court, I just ask you to read Judge McRae's book about federal court.
Judge Robert McRae, a recently retired federal judge.
And he talked about his predecessor and how he approached the cases. I won't comment on it. I just say if you want to know how Judge Boyd was, you'd have to read what Judge McRae said.
Let me ask you, as a judge, you mentioned how you were treated and your clients were treated as a lawyer before the judges. When you became a judge, there's a certain camaraderie, I take it, I'm told anyway, among judges. Did the other judges that you sat with in criminal court or in the other courts in Shelby County welcome you, or how did you deal with them?
You know, there's two things that are very strange and leads to third thought. Is that from the first day I went up there, the Judge Battle, Judge Sellers, Judge Faquin, and myself ate
Those
lunch.
were the criminal court judges.
And we ate lunch together nearly every day, either at the old Claridge Hotel. See, by that time, integration had come to Memphis, and we either
This
went to
would be 1965?
65. We went down to Claridge Hotels, Claridge Apartments now, and we had lunch together nearly every day. All we had lunch in chambers. But and I remember Jones and Lockett, two black lawyers, saying how they felt when they stood in the third floor of the courthouse and watched the four of us walking down to have lunch. You know, feeling that here's a breakthrough. It's not possible in the time I have now to describe the kind of psychic release that comes when you see the barriers fall like that. It's in a prejudiced, segregated society, town, and Memphis was as segregated as any town that I've ever known of, and as mean and as prejudiced in some ways. But Jones and Lockett came to get me that day, the first day they set up in the window of the courthouse and looked down on the street and saw the four of us going to lunch. So not only the four of them, but all of the judges treated me with great, I mean, it was just never a time when I felt, the other thing, the second thing was that it's different now, I'm sure. I don't practice law much now. I don't know how you young lawyers act, but in those days, lawyers respected the bench. And it was 20 years, perhaps 20 years from 65 to maybe 85, when any white lawyer who practiced at that time ever called me anything but judge. Never was I called Ben or Hooks, not one single time in 20-year period from 65, and long after I left the bench. Because in those days, lawyers respected judges and the court and the bench so highly that they always referred to the man on the bench as judge. And that is a strange thing. All the hollering and the hell raising about my going to the bench never, ever surfaced, not one time. In fact, the gavel I had on my bench was for ornamental purposes. I don't know whether judges use gavels or not, but I never used one. I never had to call for order, never had to reprimand a lawyer, never was treated with anything but the greatest respect. And I guess it's something that puzzles me even now, and that led to the third thing. When I was practicing law, I was active in NAACP, and I was chairman of the Freedom Fund Committee, which led the fight for integration within NAACP, along with Reverend Nabrit. And you never quite understand it, but on the day that the city, pardon me for using this word on television, but I have to use it, on the day that the city fathers, now that sounds like prejudice, but that's what it was in that day. There were no city mothers. It was city fathers. They had the power. And the day when the city fathers sat down with the NAACP, with Maxine Smith, who was our executive director, and Jesse Turner and Vasco and all the crowd that was on the other side. On the day that they sat down and decided that, well, Memphis is going to finally obey the law, and we're going to open up the restaurants and lunch counters. And, you know, I remember the day when they bodily threw men out of the Walgreens drugstore and Pantaz and all these places. I knew one fellow, bless his heart, must have been 6'2", weighed about 250 pounds, and the hoodlums were delighted, picked him up bodily and throwing him out. I mean, literally pitched him into the street. And he dusted himself off and walked back in. And I see it in my mind's eye now. And all of the trouble we caught. I remember that little side story. Judge Wilson presiding in Division II of Circuit Court, heard our appeal. We all got fined, big fines, all our clients, and we represented 5,000 or 6,000 people during that time, demonstrators. And Judge Wilson was sitting there, and he heard the case, and he told Art Shea and me, if you want to, we can just decide a handful of these cases, they can determine all the rest of them. Well, we went to Lockett and Horton, and all of us said that's too big a chance to take. The guilt, innocence of everybody depend upon the appeal of this. And of course, Judge Wilson threw the cases out. He said there's no nothing. It was so funny because it involved segregation at Woolworth.
Now, the cases he threw out were for demonstrators.
Yeah, demonstrators who were arrested for violating the segregation laws of Tennessee, of Memphis, because at that little lunch counter, it was such a fun little lunch counter. It was square. And
where was the lunch counter? At Woolworth?
At Woolworth.
Downtown?
Downtown.
Which I think just closed not too many years ago.
The lunch counter was about, I think, it couldn't have been much more than 6 to 8 feet in 3 directions. You know, a little booth like stand up. And by custom, there was no sign that said colored or white at that lunch counter. But by custom, let's say blacks ate on the south side of that little lunch. No seats. You stood up and ordered whatever you were going to order, ate it there, took it out. And on the north side, that's where the lunch counter faced toward the river. And almost as if a line had been drawn right down that bar. A black stood on the south end and around that side. Black stood on the north end and around the north side by custom for years. I remember it like it was yesterday. And then on this particular day, the blacks went on the other side. So when the case came, and city court, of course, they all got fined, the maximum fines, and we had thousands of cases pending everywhere. And when the case came before Judge Wilson...
Now let me interrupt you. Judge Wilson would sit in criminal court.
No, he was in
city court?
No, in circuit court.
Circuit court.
The appeal didn't go to the criminal court. The appeal from the city court came to the circuit court, yes. And of course, de novo, so far as that's concerned, new, talking to lawyers, I guess. And Judge Wilson, it is the strangest thing for a white man in the South to ask the kind of questions he asked. It made me think that he'd never been to that lunch counter. He said, now, what was the problem? And Shea said, well, Negroes were eating on the wrong side.
Now, Shea is the prosecutor,
He was
right?
prosecutor, yeah. And he was caught in this uncomfortable position of having to, take the city's case and do the best he could. But a very fine man. I have no personal animosity against him then or now. And Judge Wilson said, well, what was the wrong side? He said, well, they were on the side where the white folk eat. He said, what is the side where the white people eat? Is there a sign there? No, sir, no sign. Well, how did they know where they were supposed to eat? Oh, they knew. They knew. And, well, what did they do? And so he just kept, because it was no sign. That was the strangest thing in the world. Most places there was a sign. Just a custom that had been observed, I guess. Well, who called the police? Well, nobody wanted to admit to calling the police. Woolworths instructed their people don't call the police. They were afraid of a boycott nationally. So nobody knew who called the police. Then he asked the manager, did you call? No, sir, we didn't call the police. Well, what's this disorderly conduct charge? Were they rude? No, sir. Did they throw coffee on it? No, sir. Did they throw Cokes down? What did they do? And they're eating on the wrong side. Well, did the white patrons call the police? No, they didn't call the police. Well, it developed, what happened in Memphis. The police came. They were probably already down there. And they started wholesale arrests. Well, the police were asked, they said somebody called them. Who called? Well, you have to go to the station house and get the log. I mean, it was a comedy of, and halfway through the case, I recognized all over again, and Judge Wilson, one of the finest men I ever knew in this world, really. I hate that so many of these men have died that I didn't ever have the chance to, really tell them how much I appreciated their concern for the law. I have much more respect for judges in this town than I have a lot of other cities I practice law, I can tell you that. But Judge Wilson kept sitting there, he said, well, there's no sign, Nobody called the police. You know, no, he said, I'm trying to see where was the sign, and there never was a sign. Who called the police? Who was aggrieved? What was the disorderly conduct? The only disorderly conduct was that some black people were quietly munching a hot dog on, quote unquote, the wrong side of an invisible line that didn't exist. And Judge Wilson threw the whole thing out. And of course, we eventually won all the cases. Well, the point except the one involving the church. But the point I'm making is that it was a strange kind of experience that on the day, and this is my main thrust, on the day that it was decided by the city fathers, and you must remember that in Memphis there was never any other organization active but NAACP. There was no SCLC, there was no CORE, there was no SNCC. NAACP was it. Carried the whole burden of the fight here in Memphis. That they agreed on a certain day that the walls of segregation would fall, and they formed teams. I don't know how many, maybe 30 teams of black and white who went to 3 or 4 restaurants apiece all over town. Mm-hmm. And on the day they did it, and it lasted all day, there was not a single reported incident, except in one case where some water was wasted on a customer and they didn't know whether that was deliberate or accidental. I guess the point I'm making is that when I look at how the lawyers reacted, it's good and it's bad. It's good because it was the right thing to do. It's good that lawyers came before my court and reacted to me as they would any other judge, at least publicly. It was good that waitresses and waiters who the day before would have beat you over the head with a stick, the next day waited on people. But it's also a reminder to those who exercise power of how important that position is. And if you go through the Holocaust Museum in Washington and read where Hitler took power on the 30th day of January 1933, and on the 1st day of April, the first wholesale destruction of Jewish property occurred, and before 7 years had passed, the final solution was in people who obey the law can do it right or they can do it wrong, which means that those who exercise great power must be careful, because Hitler could have done all the stupid things he did so far as war was concerned and never bothered Jews as such, except that he was afraid of the intellectual ferment of a community that was known for throughout its history for being concerned with the rights of fellow human beings.
When was it that, when was that the day that the walls came down, as you said, for segregation in Memphis?
I can't remember the day, but I remember it was done on a given day. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was not a gradual process. It was not done with all deliberate speed.
About what year was that?
You know, it's hard for me to sit here and it
was before you took the bench, was it not?
Yes, I took the bench. You know, we had I think I went on the bench in '65, mm-hmm. and that January 1st of '65, my recollection is that the city council had been elected in '64, mm-hmm. and the first time we had men on the city council and the governing body who were black. And of course, unfortunately, we had Loeb, which was one of the great mistakes that Memphis made.
Mayor Henry Loeb.
Mayor Henry Loeb, who was...
He was then elected as a commissioner, I believe.
No, at the time, he was elected the first mayor under the city council.
Oh, I'm sorry, that would have been 1968.
He had been mayor
mm-hmm.
under the commission form of government and proved to be much more intolerant than men like Almond Dwyer, who were commissioners and who ordinarily, having come through the Trump era, would have been viewed as intolerant. Mm-hmm. Loeb would have been viewed as fairly liberal, but he was much more conservative, and really conservative does not describe him. He misunderstood his whole role in history, and he just, but the point that you asked me, I'm not answering, and that is, it's my recollection that when the city council took office in '65, and they were elected in '64 in the August election, that at that point we had integrated the restaurants and public facilities, but I'm not able to remember the year.
Let me let me move to a question that comes to mind from your last point about the Holocaust. Your life has been a lot devoted to matters outside of the law, but obviously it's affected a lot of the things you've done. And I guess my question is, we all know the relationship that the law had at various times to the civil rights movement. And my question is it, in what way, in your personal experience, was the law a constructive force, a force for good in that broad movement? And in what ways was it, from your own experience, a destructive force in that movement?
Well, the law was always, Justice Marshall got in a lot of trouble when he made the statement when the Constitution was written, it was not, by any stretch of imagination, the greatest document the world has known, and he was very widely criticized for having said that. They didn't read his speech. If they had read his speech, follow on in the speech, he said, but when you add the, what do you call it, the first 10 amendments to the Bill of Rights, and the 13th, 14th, 15th amendments, and other amendments, I included the 20th, as 19th was it, that gave women the right to vote. I think that was the 19th amendment. But at any rate, he says that then it became a great document. And throughout all the struggle in South Africa, one of the things that we tried to point out was that in America, at least you had the Constitution on your side. The law, I made a speech on that at DePaul University just a few days ago. The law is an instrument of social change. And I said that the law, in my judgment, is one of the things that I'm trying to teach now, is that it's rather tragic that even black historians seem to get a great kick out of the marches and demonstrations and the boycotts, and I don't think they were nearly as important as the law itself. And the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, you got to go back a long way. We were living in a completely, rigidly, ruthlessly segregated society. Black policemen hired here in Memphis could not arrest a white man, a white woman. If a white man came down Beale Street shooting folk down, the black policeman had no power to arrest him. Absolutely. They could only go and call the white police department. What kind of world is this when you have that? And when the Brown versus, so the law had been used, the Dred Scott decision, which basically said that black men had no rights that the whites were bound to respect. The Plessy versus Ferguson, which, you know, mandated this whole system, this iniquitous thing called separate but equal, always separate but never equal, which the NAACP fought from the dead start in 1909. Now, having said that, the law can, like it was under Hitler, be used as an instrument of oppression, or it can be an instrument of social change. And that's why it's important that I think lawyers have some social conscience. I'm a great advocate of the fact that lawyers ought to be more than just money chasers or legalistic. They ought to have a broad viewpoint of history, because if we don't, the statement that I've used so often, I may not quote it quite right, but one of the great German pastors, Neil Moller, I think it was, that said that first they came for the Jew, and I did nothing because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communist, I did nothing because I was not a communist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did nothing because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for me. And by that time, there was nobody doing anything for anybody. Martin King put it in a short way, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And when I see lawyers who become bigoted, intolerant, narrow-minded, simplistic, and try to use the law as an instrument of oppression, instrument of putting some folk down and raising some people up, for discriminating against women because they're women. When I see lawyers like that, I think that they don't recognize that the law can be an instrument of change, but that change can be for the good or for the worse, because the laws that Hitler passed were laws that degraded humanity and almost destroyed civilization, caused the death of millions and millions of people. And by the same token, when we come to the era of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, at that point the law was an instrument for good. But the lawyers and others refused to enforce it. And then the Plessy versus Ferguson decision rolled back the law. The Brown versus Board of Education, when I finally came to realize, a few days after that decision, it took me as a young practicing lawyer, involved in the civil rights struggle, aware of Brown versus Board and what it was all about, it took me a few days to recognize that this decision would forever change America. And that's why the white politicians who were opposed talked about nullification, interposition, and everything, massive resistance, because they knew if you were going to integrate the school room, how could you have a separate water fountain, a separate toilet, a separate swimming pool? The same court that said you can't segregate in the school certainly couldn't allow you to segregate within the school. So the wall would have to come tumbling down.
In Memphis, what role did lawyers like yourself, like other black lawyers, maybe even white lawyers, what role did lawyers have in the legal aspect that you've talked about of the civil rights movement?
The young lawyers in Memphis, H.T. Lockett and Ben Jones, Odell Horton, later on Russell Sugarman, I was in the group, S.A. Wilburn in the later time. Every black lawyer, Mr. Ladin did not participate too much. After the initial thing, he did not participate too much. I understood why. He was older. He gave us all the advice we wanted, but he just didn't get involved, and the young lawyers were full of salt and vinegar. Every young black lawyer in town that was here carried the brunt. We filed every kind of case you can think of over in the federal court. School desegregation, the segregation of the bus system, playground parks, and we argued those cases right here. What the NAACP did was they had numerous cases. They didn't take a chance. They filed the same case maybe in 50 places, and then they were consolidated. Brown versus Board of Education was kind of unfortunate that that became the lead case, because it really came out of Crittenden County, South Carolina. Started off because black veterans really were not asking for integration. They were really asking that the school system provide buses for black children. And the school system, in effect, said, the school authorities said, buses for white kids. You know, the black kids can walk. And out of that, when they went to NAACP, the NAACP would not settle for separate equal. They went for integration, the Clarendon County case. Brown got picked up
as one of several consolidated cases.
And it became known as the Brown case out of Topeka, Kansas, but it involved a number of cases. And there's a great movie made, I think it was called, anyway, it had Earl Warren, and it depicted him after he was named Supreme Court Justice coming to Washington and going down into the Valley of Virginia to look at the historic places. And earlier the next morning, he came out and discovered his chauffeur sleeping behind the wheel of the car. And he asked him why he was doing that. And it became obvious. The reason is there's no place for a colored man to sleep here. And the movie shows this as giving Earl Warren his second awakening on this whole issue, which separated him. And Justice Frankfurter, one of the most brilliant jurists who ever sat, being reminded by his law clerk that black folk are the only people that come to the Supreme Court that could not get justice. They were told to go across the street to the Congress. Now, it was a great movie, and it was about the life of Thurgood Marshall, and it showed the critical role of law. And I tell you that as far as I am concerned, had there been no Brown versus Board of Education case, that everything else we did would have been put back 20 or 30 years. It took the Brown versus Board of, it was a failed case in many ways, because we're still fighting for integration of schools. 40 years later, I spent much of my NAACP career trying to make Brown versus Board come to life. But the doctrine it espoused and what it said is what led the groundwork and awakened people. And I don't depreciate the marching. I don't depreciate the demonstration. I led enough of them myself and participated in many of them. And I think they were necessary. But the big thing was the law achieved by the NAACP and other organizations, but primarily NAACP, in the courtroom, and the legislative victories in the Congress.
In Memphis, and you mentioned that the NAACP was really the movement in Memphis.
That's right.
Now, in Memphis, in terms of the legal front, what strike you in retrospect as the most important moments, victories, cases?
Well, the fact that we had black lawyers made all the difference. And we carried the fight. The fight, not the brunt, not the most, but we carried the fight. for the most part, the city, county, and state were represented by white lawyers. There were no black lawyers employed at that point that I can recall, and any assistant, city assistant, city attorneys, anything else of that kind. In the federal courts, we carried the brunt of it, and coming down to help us were Judge Constance Motley, Judge Robert Carter. They both became judges. They were black lawyers who came here to help us. And of course, the federal government had some black lawyers, but the defense was always conducted by the white legal craft. The white lawyers represented the other side. And of course, at that point, there was no great ground movement among white lawyers to take leadership in any way. They did not openly espouse the cause of segregation, as I recall it.
So this was a burden as far as the legal fight that was borne almost exclusively, if not exclusively, in Memphis by black lawyers.
Yes.
There was really no help from, okay.
Exclusively by black lawyers. At some point, later on, there were, well, even before that, there were white lawyers involved in a move to remove Memphis from the clutches of the Crump machine. And that was a fairly liberal movement. Lucian Birch was one of the leading lawyers.
This would have been when, roughly? 19...
That was just before Mr. Crump died in '52. I think he died in '52. And since, that came a group. Ed Meeman, who was editor of the Press Scimitar, who always fought Crump, and I think it was Buckman, the Buckman Laboratories, and there were a group of people, but the lawyer I remember most was Lucian Birch.
And these folks were considered a sort of good government reform movement that took on the Crump political machine.
Yeah, all that crowd got involved in trying to, and then after Crump died, trying to lead it, Memphis forward in some racial progress. So there was a liberal movement here as such, but it was more political than legal. Mm-hmm. And when Dr. King was killed, at that point, Lucian Birch was representing him.
In fact, Lucian Birch, as I understand it, was one of the lawyers, if not the lead lawyer, involved in getting him a federal court injunction to, or I'm trying to remember, it was to get permission from the federal court to march.
That's right. He was the one of the lawyers of record, the lead lawyer, and they were trying to enjoin in federal court Martin from carrying on another march, and Lucian Birch was the lead lawyer, and of course his firm always had a very liberal reputation.
His firm, of course, being Birch, Porter & Johnson.
Birch, Porter & Johnson, yes.
Let me move forward to that moment in Memphis history. All of us who live in Memphis know that 1968, the spring of 1968, was a pivotal moment in Memphis history. Pivotal may not even do it justice. And for those who aren't from Memphis or don't know, it was a time of the sanitation workers for the city of Memphis going on strike, and ultimately it was the circumstances that gave rise to the death of Dr. Martin Luther King. During that time, which would have been, I guess, the first months of 1968, what was your role? I understand you were a member of the board of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Was that at that time you were?
Yes. Well, I was relatively on the sidelines because I was on the bench, and as a sitting judge, I was always aware of the dual nature of my own situation. I could not afford to be isolated from the fight, but I could not afford to jeopardize the judgeship or to do things that I thought were unseemly. And so I deliberately kept a very quiet public role. I was meeting with Dr. King quite often about other places other than Memphis, but we had sufficiently able and articulate black leaders in Memphis that they did not necessarily need my participation, so that to a certain extent I was not involved directly. There was another lawyer, however, that did two lawyers, Louis Donaldson, who was on the city council, that played a leading role in trying to bring about peace. And another lawyer, I wish I could think of his name, he served on that first city council.
Gosh.
he did an excellent
I know who you're
job
referring to. He was with the Thomas and Crawford Hendricks firm
Yes.
at one time. May have, was it Roy Hendricks?
No, it wasn't
it was,
Hendricks. What was his name? I don't think of maybe before.
Okay.
Hamer. But anyway, he became very well disliked in a way because he played such a prominent role. But one can never forget that Lewis Donaldson also played a prominent role in trying to bring about some peace in this city. So those are two lawyers that I can remember. There may have been many others, but those are the ones I recall.
Let me take a turn here for a minute. We've been talking a lot about the law, but I don't want to end this interview without talking about, there may be other subjects, but one certainly I want to talk about, and that is your ministry. You've been a Baptist minister for, I gather, most of your adult life.
Yes, I started practicing law when I was, I guess, 24. I received my license to practice when I was 23 in Illinois and 24 in Memphis, and I practiced law about 6 years before I entered the ministry, formally. I'm a Baptist, and of course Baptists really hold to the tradition that if you are a preacher, whenever you announce that you always were, you were announced and unannounced.
Sort of like finding the common law.
That's right. We believe that you are called to the ministry and don't answer, don't make yourself a minister. But I made my profession known when I was 30 in 1955.
Tell me where that came from, as best you understand it. I mean, I don't know, in your family, was there a tradition of ministry?
No. In fact, I might have been a little bit the opposite. My father, for some reason, was a God-fearing man, but he did not belong to the organized church. And somewhere along the way, he had developed a little feeling that maybe ministers were not quite as upright as they ought to be. And so he never encouraged me in the ministry.
What sparked then your ministry?
Well, I guess, remembering the black experience, in my youth, the leaders of the black community were always ministers. So that it was not strange that they were the heroes of the black community.
More so than lawyers and doctors,
yes, because we didn't have that many lawyers. Every town had 40 or 50 ministers, so if you didn't go into civil rights, they wore good suits and they wore shirts and ties, and they were given a certain amount of respect, and they exercised certain functions of leadership. So that, and then nationally, I was influenced, I think, early on by the Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr., and Adam Clayton Powell Jr., more or less, and bishops of the AME Church had always been strong advocates for freedom. The AME Church was born as a protest movement. My pastor, as I said, had been a state senator and understood the value of politics. So that I was always, as a lot of young black boys were, more than maybe boys in the white community, influenced by the clergy and by their acceptance and their ability to do things. But I also had decided from my reading and my, we had a great experience. There were two great black papers that were circulating in this community, the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier. And by the way, my father and my brother always made sure that we had one every week. And they talked about what was going on.
These were weekly newspapers circulated
that
within
were
the black community.
hard-hitting about segregation and about lynching, and about all the things that were happening wrong, insisting on elimination of segregation.
And let me drop a footnote here, because at that time then, I gather there was virtually no reporting of the black community or events in the black community in the white press. Is that right?
No, that was one.
So you could read the commercial appeal and not know the black community existed.
Well, they covered us, but it was sort of in a patronizing way. If you jail and criminals, they certainly covered. The good things that black folk did were sort of relegated, more or less, and there was just no forum. And there was no Jet magazine, no Ebony. So the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier, in this part of the country, on the East Coast, you had the Baltimore Afro-American, but they covered, and they were uncompromising foes of segregation prejudice and discrimination, and more against prejudice and discrimination than against segregation, because, you know, except the situation that in Memphis, Tennessee, and Jackson, Mississippi, and Atlanta, Georgia, a black teacher and a white teacher who both had degrees from accredited schools received different salaries. So a defender could very well fight for equality of pay. They could fight for blacks on the police force. I mean, there were a lot of fights that were real, that had nothing to do with, I mean, you could still be segregated, but at least be treated equal. And the fact that you could not, here in this city, for many years you took an examination, what they call clerk carrier in the post office, but never ever did they hire a carrier. The same examination. The best you could get was to be a letter carrier, not a clerk. But the exam qualified you to either be a clerk or carrier, and that was true all over the South. White people were hired as clerks and blacks as carriers, and then they got to places that wouldn't hire you as a carrier. You had to be a postal laborer or a janitor. My brother went through that bit of experience. I should say, hurrying back to my father, that he welcomed the fact that I became a minister and eventually joined my church. I had the blessed privilege of baptizing him in my church, but it was...
Let me move you back to your ministry for a minute, if I could. Now, you pastored beginning at the age of 30, I think
30,
you said?
yes, I started pastoring.
And this is in addition to practicing law,
yes,
and doing the other things that you did in your life. At what point, during what period in your life have you not been a minister? I mean, have you been a minister throughout?
I was, before I was a minister, I was involved heavily in the church. I was always active as a lay person, and I made a lot of speeches, lay speeches in the church community of Memphis and across the nation. So I was busy.
Well, let me back you up now. There was a time when you were younger and when you were 30. Where did you pastor? I was pastor of Middle Baptist Church in Memphis. Then I was, in the Baptist tradition, we called it, you're not assigned to a church, you're called by the congregation. I was called to pastor a church in Detroit. How did that come to pass?
Well, that was because, kind of unusual. In the rural South, there had been a great tradition of Sundays, of churches that met on the 1st and 3rd, and churches met on the 2nd and 4th because economic necessity. Some churches only met once a month. Because there weren't enough ministers. The pastor may serve 4 churches. But my church was what we call a church that had services every Sunday, and I preached every Sunday. My deacon's father died in Detroit. I went with him and had a word to say at the funeral, and 3 or 4 months after that, that church became vacant. That is, the pastor resigned. And they were kind of split right down the middle over some things, and somehow as a compromise, they called me and I went and remained there 30 years. But that was peculiar because that's unusual to serve in 2 big churches full time. And then when I went to the FCC, I could not receive, Federal Communications Commission, I could not receive any salary. So I resigned as pastor and took the job in 1972. And I became what we call minister on leave. And I went back and preached, but I was not a paid pastor as such. And then the NAACP had the same requirement, so that from 72 until 93, I was working with those churches, but I was not paid any money. I was what we call pastor on leave, and I preached there on alternate Sundays. And so I can say I've had a straight-through experience of some 42 years in Memphis, and I resigned Detroit 2 or 3 years ago. I was there 30 years. And you still pastor at Greater Middle Baptist Church? Greater Middle Baptist here in Memphis. Now, is that the same church community that you started pastoring at at age 30? Yes, that's right. I've been there 42 years now. There are a lot of things we obviously can't talk about, but a couple of more topics I want to talk about quickly. You mentioned in passing what might have been what many people know you for in your career, certainly nationally, and that is the, I think, 16 years you spent as executive director of the NAACP. I don't want to give short shrift to that long period of your life, but let me ask it this way. That was a period, you became executive director in 1972. Pardon. 77. 77, excuse me, I'm sorry, 77. But at that time in history, we've talked a little about this, many of the sort of legal battles or legislative battles of the civil rights movement had been won.
And I guess my question for you is, during your tenure at the NAACP, in what ways, from a legal point of view, did you see the NAACP under your stewardship make its greatest contributions or have its greatest setbacks?
Well, that was one of the strange things. And during my tenure, we passed 25 major legislative bills. Most people are not aware of that because they think the fight was over. First thing we had to do was repass the Voting Rights Act. And to our surprise and consternation, we discovered that the administration didn't want it repassed in a strong form. The last big fight that I had was the South African Sanctions Bill, which without any question led to the end of apartheid in South Africa. In between, we had any number of legislative, many of them came about because the Supreme Court became more conservative. The Grove City case, which mandated that they decided in that case that if a school discriminated against women in the athletic department, that it wouldn't affect federal funds in any other department, which meant that the school was free to take a chance on discrimination against women or minorities and only be penalized in the particular department which it happened. We went to the Congress and got that law passed that nullified that case. The case of the Barker case, which was one of our tremendous legal victories. Most people thought we lost that case, but the fact of the matter is that Alan Barker was admitted to the law school, but in Justice Powell's opinion, he pointed out that you could consider color as one of the criteria that you use in admissions, but that could not be the only criteria. So that we won a case involving Lionel Jeter, a young man sentenced to life imprisonment for allegedly holding up a fried chicken place, and the key had been thrown away. NAACP took the case and finally proved his innocence, so he was released. The case, I could just go up and down the line. It was far from over. The Voting Rights Act, as I said, had to be repassed, and early on I discovered that was my first big legislative hurdle. We had the boycotts and demonstrations down in Forsyth County, Georgia, where they didn't want the blacks to live. We had the Vanderbilt Cup match, where we were trying to keep South Africa from being involved in athletic demonstration, athletic participation to further knock down the walls of apartheid. This Americans with Disabilities Act, one of the largest and greatest civil rights bills ever passed, was the work of NAACP and the Leadership Conference. The Martin Luther King Holiday Bill, which some people said would never come to pass. So that our place was full. Then the implementation of the Voting Rights Act. Most people forgot that when the Voting Rights Act was passed, it was not self-enforcing. It's not something that the inspector comes into your grocery and says, you got a scale here that gives 16 when it's only 14, or you got rats running out of the hole, you don't have this, that, and other. Voting Rights Act, it has to be enforced by citizens. If nobody brings a complaint, nothing happens. So the NAACP found itself, I mean, we had simply thousands of cases brought to us that we had to deal with, where they changed the hours of voting, or the places of registration, or the places of voting, or a next territory, all kinds of things. So that I remember what Thurgood Marshall said, that most people take the position that now we've won these big legislative fights, is over, but now comes the hard part. So I had the hard part, and the day was not glamorous when most people thought, well, it's over, what are you fighting about? And one of the great questions that Gorbachev asked when he was here, where the fight was, as he went through the Civil Rights Museum. And so we've won a lot of victories, but the fact of racism and all its ugly stains is still there, and you have a Congress that it seems intent on dismantling the very apparatus that helped us to come out of it. And you only have to walk through one of the banks downtown today and see hundreds of black people employed, and go back to my day when the only black in the bank was, carrying a mop or a broom, to know what affirmative action has done. And now to dismantle it before the work is complete is disheartening, and it's a fight that must be carried on.
Let me ask you, taking the kind of long view that you just expressed, and not limiting yourself to any one area necessarily, what do you think today is the greatest challenge facing the law and lawyers and judges?
Well, I think that it's the common tendency to think that the battle is over, the victory's been won, and now it's time to discard the very tools that brought us there. I've heard people say there may have been a time for affirmative action but that day is past. I've heard a generation of young white people say, well, I never had slaves. I never owned a slave, so I shouldn't be a part of it. But America has built itself and has become great simply because it has recognized that from time to time it has discriminated, it has unfairly treated people, and they try to make amends for it. That's what makes the nation strong. And since no chain is any stronger than its weakest link, whether you're white or black, red, brown, or yellow, the fact remains that a strong America makes it a stronger place for all of us, and a weak America makes it a weak America. And when you look at the diversity of this world in which we live, and recognize that most of the population of the world is not white, but is colored, and that's what the NAACP is named, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, because early on they recognized there were yellow and brown and red who were being discriminated against, and that we had to work together to eliminate it. When you get to that understanding, then you begin to realize that if you want a strong America, diversity must be that. There's a little slogan that some company has, and it has a white man on the face of a little book, and it says, we must realize as we build our company that in the future most of our workers will not look like you. There will not be white men. There are white females coming into the stream. There are other minorities coming into the stream of the workforce. And if we don't understand that, and America is dangerously close now, there's a backlash against progress. So if the law does not recognize that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing, if lawyers don't recognize that, we could go back to the Stone Age right quickly.
Like 2 or 3 minutes.
Oh, that's fine. One last question for you, Dr. Cooks. I'm not the first person to have observed, I've read it about you and I've heard other people say it, that through a long life that could have in other people engendered bitterness and negative feelings of all kind. When you talk to us today, when you express yourself in other forms I've seen you express yourself in, when you write, there's always a note of optimism, of belief in the good faith of at least many people. And I guess my question for you in closing is that the way you perceive your attitude? And if so, where does that come from? Where does that come from in your life?
I've been asked that question. I've never asked it satisfactorily. I think that it's just one of the things that is a way of life. I know where I came from. I knew how poor and poverty-stricken I was, but I never was hungry. I don't want to give that impression, but being the fifth child in the family, wearing hand-me-down clothes and not being able to go to college, and every time they posted the note on the board, I knew that my tuition had not been paid, and having to endure all of that, having served in the segregated army, and yet in my own life I've seen the progress. And I don't want young people to feel like they can't make it. I just abhor. If I come close to hating anything, it's this attitude to hear somebody get up and say that black folk and the racial problem is no better than it ever was. I mean, it's so stupid. Then you got a black mayor, a black superintendent of the school system, and blacks in the criminal and civil justice system, and you just recently had a black president of the Memphis and Shelby County Bar Association, and 4 members of the cabinet, and 45 members of the Black Caucus. We have a long way to go. That's the other side of the coin. Those who give up and say, well, it's never going to be any better. It is better than it has been, but we have a long way to go. So that gives me the double horns of my dilemma. And I'm not a bitter person. I could be very much, and I could be bitter against some black folk and against. I've been mistreated by everybody. It didn't take any color of skin. I've been treated by male and female, black, white, yellow, red, and brown. I've been mistreated by everybody that can mistreat you, those in power and those out of power. But I don't retain, I don't think, much bitterness, because it's just not a good way to live. I'm 73 and hope to make 74 and some more. And I understand that bad mind and heart, not physical heart, but your bad heart in terms of prejudice and hatred can ruin your life. And I enjoy reasonably good health. I want to continue to enjoy it, so proud of it. It's selfish. It's the way you're born, the way you come up, I guess, and the way that you look at life. And then my life, I am still dedicated to the proposition that Jefferson may not have known exactly what he said. All of us are created equal, and we have a right to pursue happiness.
Thank you, Dr. Hooks.